They seated me under fluorescent lights that hummed like they had a secret to tell and pointed a camera at my face, the way true crime podcasts aim at a voice. And a woman from legal said, "Please look into the lens and say your name and title and why you're here." And I said my name and my title, and that I was here because my American dream tried to eat itself. And this video would become mandatory, watching for interns between cybersecurity basics and how to expense a bagel. Maticharan and legal said, "Can you keep it factual and not theatrical?" And I said I can try. But betrayal tends to monologue, so here goes. The reason the lobby windows are still boarded up since the sprinkler incident. And the reason our company handbook now has a section titled Fraternization, Babysitting. And the Hampton Inn is that on June 14th, a certain productivity-obsessed executive and my cheating wife decided to rehearse a keynote in a hotel room while our 8-month-old was at home in a crib staring at the spinning planet projection I bought from Target and crying himself from A to horse. And while I realize those are heavy words, I am recording them because they're true, and because truth is the only thing that beats rumors in a race. And also because somewhere in here there's a lesson about revenge that doesn't require handcuffs or country music, which is good because I'm more of a quiet coffee person than a jailhouse rock person. And if this feels like I'm starting at the end, that's intentional. Because the way people watch corporate videos is they skip to the last minute to see if there's a quiz, and I want the quiz first. What do you do when your boss is the secret co-author of your marriage's infidelity, and the baby monitor app says, "Soothing sounds achieved," while your family is undergoing toxic love triage? What do you do when you realize you've been living inside a parody of the American hustle, where cheating is called networking, abandonment is called self-care, and loyalty is a slide deck with stock photos of smiling brunch friends, and legal clears her throat and says, "Please be mindful," and HR says, "We prefer human resources, not HR." And I say, I'll be mindful but not quiet, because quiet is how the bad version of family becomes the normal version of family. And I can't let that be my son's inheritance. And the video guy nods like he's filming a Super Bowl spot instead of an onboarding module. And I tell the lens the night in question began for me with a Zoom call where the boss said the phrase, "Crush Q3" 7 times, then ended early, then sent a calendar block called Strategy Huddle that looked like work and smelled like aloe lotion. And my wife texted that she was stepping out for oat milk, which was funny because our fridge had an unopened carton, but I said, "Okay," because that is marriage. It is 1,000 okays that you give without a receipt. And when the Zoom ended, I heard the baby through the wall doing that pre-cry hiccup, the "did someone move the universe" sound, and I opened the nursery app and watched the little mountain range of audio spikes and told myself she'd be back in a second. And the app offered a tip about wearing a soft sweater to transmit calm, and I wanted to throttle a programmer. And legal raises a hand and says, "Please do not threaten any departments," and I say, "Metaphorical throttle." The kind you do in your head while microwaving leftovers, and by 8:03 p.m. I had 3 tabs open: company Slack, the nursery cam, and the app that shows where your phone is because America is surveillance with coupons. And the blue dot floated not at the grocery store, but near the Hampton off I-95. And in another window, our executive's speech draft rolled on, an ode to putting family first with a bullet about mental load. And I watched my son's chest rise and fall in pixels and felt a kind of betrayal that doesn't find a word immediately. The kind that stands up in your bloodstream and starts packing boxes, and people think revenge is gasoline and matches. But in real life, it's spreadsheets and printer paper and a composure you've never met before moving into your throat and saying, "Speak softly and document everything." So I documented. Receipts like breadcrumbs, and in this very room, legal, you remember, I delivered a timeline that made the coffee go cold. And you know the aftermath because you had to write the memos. But for the sake of the interns who will watch this video while deciding if they should valet or park 2 blocks away, let me explain the fireworks backwards. The alarms, the sprinkler rain, The picnic tables dragged into the lobby because someone thought a surprise town gathering would feel wholesome. The projector that looped a screen share of my evidence because a junior developer, bless her midnight caffeine, wrote a script to cast my phone to every nearly smart device in the building. And before you assume I am proud of the chaos, I am not. I am proud of the clarity, because betrayal hates the lights on. And when the lights came on, we saw how flimsy the story had been. And that's the reason this video exists. So welcome to the company. Please sign the policy acknowledging that you won't treat other people's homes like your personal green room. And if you're ever tempted to justify infidelity as adulting, remember that an 8-month-old is not a scheduling conflict. He is a person who will one day ask you what a family is, and your answer should not sound like a quarterly update. And the camera light blinked red, meaning we were done. But I kept talking because endings never land clean. They are more like landing a plane with one engine, while someone in 14B complains about the snack mix. And I said into the lens that the only way to defeat toxic love is ordinary love, the kind you practice when no one is filming. And the legal woman surprised me by saying, "Keep that line." And for a second, we were 3 Americans in a fluorescent room, none of us heroes, all of us wanting a better chapter for the next kid born under these policies. And the camera stopped. There's a corkboard in my garage now with yarn like a low-budget detective show. And if that sounds dramatic, wait until you hear about the app called Focus Pal that our executive invented, which claims to reduce screen time by gamifying attention but actually increases screen time because people obsess over their scores. And there's a leaderboard called Village where employees compete for purity like a tech monastery. And I only mention this because it folds into the conspiracy that wasn't a conspiracy, the one where meeting invites labeled resource sync were cover for personal rehearsals where 2 adults synced in ways the policy manual does not recommend. And if you think I'm reaching, I'd agree, except for the receipts, the card with the last 4 digits, 1881, the conference room booked in the app for after hours with no attendees, the lift that took a certain person from the office loading dock to the Hampton at the exact moment my phone alert said, "Nursery volume elevated." And I know I keep repeating that, but repetition is how you build a case and also how babies learn to say, "da-da," a word that arrived a week later like a small sunrise. And look, I'll confess I leaned into parody to keep from unraveling. I built a fake religion on the corkboard where our executive was the high priest of hustle, and the altar was a ring light, and the hymns were TED clips, and the commandments were bullet points in a slide, and every prophecy ended with a discount code for merch, and my wife's texts read like scripture from that church, lines about destiny and boldness and being seen, phrases that, in a healthier context, would be therapy. But here were excuses. And what do you do when the person you pledged forever to start speaking in inspirational caption fonts? What do you do when emotional distance gets rebranded as giving each other space to grow? I'll tell you, you turn into the kind of American who reads terms and conditions for sport, because hidden in the white noise is always the one clause that changes everything. And in ours, it was the camera, the sleek little owl that watches the crib and stores 30 days of footage in the cloud. And the cloud does not forget, so I rolled back the timeline to 7:28 p.m. Dion, and somewhere else a room key beeped, and on my screen a mobile over the crib spun while my son stared at the shadow of a giraffe, and the app cheerily recommended brown noise, rain on tent. And I imagined rain on a Hampton roof and wondered whether fate is just logistics with better lighting. And about then, my neighbor texted me a short video from his doorbell camera, a car leaving our driveway and then returning, leaving again and then not returning, a stupid loop like a magician's trick. And the truth landed in my ribs that I was the only adult on duty. So I drove, and halfway there called our sitter and begged her to meet me at the house. And she sprinted like track and unlocked like a pro. And by the time I reached our street, my son was safe in her arms, and feeling betrayed is not the same as being helpless. So that helped. And no, I did not storm the hotel, because revenge is not improvisational theater. It's long form, it's pacing, and my boss already thought in brand terms. So I decided to play in his arena, but not yet. Not until I'd confronted the person who had promised me ordinary Tuesday nights forever. And here is where the conspiracy board looks like art. Yarn lines from the Lyft receipt to the credit card to the app's beta build to a Slack message where a junior developer joked about eat, pray, productivity, and the line ends at a framed photo from our last company picnic where the executive is holding someone else's trophy and my wife is laughing in a way that looks innocent unless you've seen the hotel elevator mirror selfie she sent him by mistake, which I did at 9:32 p.m. A captioned, "You're a bad influence," a sentence that will echo until I die. And maybe this is where I admit that calling her a cheating wife in my head felt like a jar I could put on a shelf, a label that stung but simplified. And people will judge the label, and they should, because behind it is a complicated person with postpartum and pressure and nostalgia and a hunger to feel alive. And I don't deny any of that. But at 8:03 p.m., a small person was sobbing in a crib, and the adults had chosen a script that spelled infidelity with a brand voice. And my hand shook and then steadied and then got to work, printing, saving, notarizing my grief into PDFs, a modern American liturgy, and at the bottom of the corkboard I pinned a Polaroid of my son drooling on a rubber giraffe, because conspiracy without a center becomes a hobby. And my center wasn't revenge for its own sake. It was the moment in the future when he'd ask me to define family, and I could answer without flinching. Start with the sound of a lullaby sung by an app, something with violins and optimism, and then pan down to the crib where the optimism keeps time while a baby's face tries to understand absence, and cut to a kitchen island with 2 mugs and one note that says oat milk, which is an inside joke we stopped finding funny 2 weeks ago, and tilt to a dining room chair where a denim jacket hangs like it's thinking about staying, and cut to me on a freeway. Legal speed plus the kind of extra that won't make a trooper suspicious, a half-finished protein bar turning into chalk in my mouth, and you think the climax is going to be me bursting through a hotel door with righteous dad energy. But it isn't, because life likes irony. And mine was that my key scene happened in my own living room, where the baby had been lifted from the crib by the sitter who smelled like peppermint and urgency, and I walked in relieved and ashamed and grateful. A cocktail Americans drink after every disaster, and I held him and he hiccuped, and we stood there like a 3-person monument to triage. And the sitter said she could stay until midnight, and I said thank you and texted my wife a simple, "Where are you?" And the dots appeared and disappeared, and then she wrote, "Milk run." And I wrote, "Come home." And she wrote, "Don't police me." And there are texts that break something quietly like frost on a windshield you only see in morning light. And then I set the phone down and wondered how to be both tender and furious, how to keep the word family from collapsing under the word cheating. And the door opened, not then but later, after a small eternity of cartoons and breathing, and a bath we did not need but did anyway. And she came in with hair that said there had been wind, and an expression that said there had been a script rehearsal, and she kissed the air near the child and asked why the sitter was here. And I said, "Because you weren't." And she said, "You're dramatic," and I showed her the app's timeline and the ring of red where the sound level measured betrayal. And she said the app is buggy, and I showed her a credit card charge, and she said it was a mistake. And then she tried the classic reframe. Our marriage needed freshness. We had become roommates. I didn't look at her the way the executive did. He made her feel powerful. He said, family is a startup and she could be a founder. And she is not a villain in every frame. She's an American woman who felt invisible in yoga pants stained with applesauce while my ambition married my laptop. And the moment you acknowledge her humanity is the moment people think you're weak. But that's the moment I knew revenge would not be a scorched earth. It would be a mirror held at the exact angle of truth, no higher, no lower. And I told her what I had, the receipts, the messages, the elevator mirror selfie that had no caption this time. And her face went through a weather system, flurries, drizzle, a flash flood of tears, then freeze and thaw and storm again. And she said she never meant to hurt the baby, which is a phrase that lives in the same apartment as I never meant to hurt you. And I said, want and mean are cousins, but action is the parent. And the sitter quietly gathered her things, and I pressed money into her hand like gratitude could be folded, and I told my wife I would sleep in the guest room, and she said that was unnecessary, and I said necessary had already left the building. And that night I lay on a mattress that felt like a waiting room chair, and the baby snored like a small bulldozer, and I rehearsed the next day. The meeting with legal, the conversation with the board, the line I would not cross, no name-calling, no theatrics, just evidence, and a sentence that would ring, "A family is not a platform for your personal brand." And there's a version of this story where I slashed tires and threw paint and got a mugshot and called it justice. But revenge that leaves your child a headline is just a different kind of infidelity. So I wrote emails instead and scheduled them for 9 a.m. and closed my eyes. Morning arrived like a polite sheriff, and I sent the emails to the right people. Audit, legal, a board member whose Christmas cards looked like they were shot on a ranch. And within the hour, there was a huddle with paper cups and the executive's face, doing that thing where charm looks for an exit and can't find one. And we walked through my timeline as if it were a museum exhibit, artifacts labeled and lit. The lift receipt, the app timestamps, the expense line item with the euphemistic label, the message thread with "This is our year" attached to a photo that wasn't a calendar, and someone from legal asked my wife to step into a separate room with a counselor, because Americans try, when they're at their best, to save what can be saved. And I told the room I wasn't here for drama. I was here because honesty is cheaper than therapy if you do it early enough. And the executive tried a speech about two consenting adults in privacy and how work should stay out of personal lives. And I said that would be persuasive if a child hadn't been left alone for 91 minutes, and the room changed temperature. And then the board member with the ranch cards asked me if I wanted money to keep quiet, and I said I wanted policies that actually mean something and a culture that doesn't confuse charisma with character. And then I resigned. Yes, I left the job I had worked hard for, because staying would have signed an NDA with my own spine. And on the way out, a junior developer pressed a flash drive into my hand and said, "Check the conference room camera logs." They auto-archive to the server. No one ever checks. And that's how the projector incident happened later that day. Not because I wanted a circus, but because transparency looks like spectacle when you're used to curated feeds. And I plugged the drive into a laptop near the lobby display, and suddenly there were the two stars of a show that should have been canceled before pilot, walking hand in hand toward a door labeled "No food or drink." And there was a collective inhale the size of a stadium, and the sprinkler system decided it was a good time to rehearse its own performance, and everything got wet, which felt karmic and cinematic. And afterward, there were statements and resignations and a small parade of excuses. And then lawyers drew boxes around the mess and put signatures in those boxes. And at home, I sat across from my wife with a mediator at the head of the table, and we divided the week like a country line down a map. And there were tears and apologies and acknowledgments of postpartum and all the invisible architecture that collapses under pressure. And I told her I would never teach our son to hate her, because that would be another betrayal. And we signed. And the word custody felt both heavy and like a safety net. And then we began the rebuild, which is not a montage. It's a slow bicycle up a hill. It's purging the house of appliances that talk to you like a motivational coach. It's buying a calendar you write on with a pen because paper doesn't send push notifications. It's early mornings where I fry eggs and a small person throws toast like confetti. It's a bedtime routine that is boring, blessedly boring. And in that boring, I found the antidote to toxic love, which is the kind that waters plants on Tuesdays without posting about it. And if you're watching this story for the fireworks, I'm sorry to disappoint you. The bang already happened, and the only satisfying revenge left is living well and raising a kid who knows that family is supposed to feel like a sturdy porch, not a brand activation. And sometimes I pass the Hampton off I-95 and the sign winks with vacancy, and I think about how our culture sells infidelity like it's a subscription box, surprise joy delivered monthly. And I remind myself that surprise joy doesn't cry at 8:03 p.m. When the app says white noise on, and when my son says da-da now, it sounds like a verdict in my favor. And if you want a bow on the story, here it is. The executive is gone. The company is in couples therapy with itself. My ex is finding a gentler therapist and learning to say sorry without a speech. And I am learning to love the unphotogenic parts of life, the ones with no filters. And when I tuck my son in, I tell him a fairy tale where a castle nearly burned down because two grown-ups confused desire with destiny, and how the kingdom rebuilt with chores and apologies and honest bread. And then I turn off the lamp and sit on the floor for 10 minutes while he breathes evenly, a simple ritual I plan to keep, because in a world of spinning narratives and curated spectacle, this is the only episode I want to keep renewing. And if anyone asks me to summarize what happened, I tell them a story about betrayal, cheating, infidelity, and a father who picked the kind of revenge that fits into a lunchbox. Clean hands, steady eyes, and a promise kept.